Just continuing on from where Dennis left off, are there any Native Americans living in our area anymore? This is a question you actually get when school groups come to our center. I've had this several times. And one of the reasons people ask that, like what Ron was talking about before too, is because a lot of the stuff that they get in school has to do with history. And it's like, well, Native Americans a long time ago did this, and look at this artifact. And it's always talked about in the past. And so I started to think, how would you prove your own identity? Not like with your driver's license or your Costco card, but how would you prove your own identity if you lived 2,000 years ago? Now you don't have a driver's license and you don't have any photo ID, so how are we going to go about doing this? So I wrote out a little list. The first one would be memory. Oh yeah, I remember you. My family talked of you, and so it'd be like your oral history, right? That would be memory is the first one. The second one is jewelry. And so the kind of jewelry people wore would tell where you came from, because of the items that you're using as your jewelry may not necessarily be found in some other place. And so that would be identification. It would also sometimes would tell your social status or what you did for a living. So your jewelry was kind of important. And then it was like, let's go on a little bit more. What about with the military? They have a type of jewelry too. It'd be the dog tags that would give their name. But let's go back in history again. Different military groups in the world would wear different types of uniforms, or maybe it would be specific things for warfare. Like the Romans, they had spurs on their sandals, that would hurt. And so the military clothes that people wore when they would travel around would identify who they were as well. And then we hit onto the census. And okay, so the census goes back to, Christmas time, where the story goes that Jesus of Nazareth was going to Bethlehem. And, so we knew that the census was around going back at least, over 2,000 years ago. In America, the census started in 1790. And so then that started to become interesting when I wanted to read about the census and how it affected Native Americans. Well, the census changed from 1790 to in 1850. 1850 was a very significant date. 1850 is when California got its statehood. 1850 was also when the census changed, and now as Americans, they would write if you were white, with a W, B if it was black. If anyone has ever seen census records, there's like little boxes on the side of it, and it's kind of interesting to see how it's evolved. And then also they even had something for some Native Americans. For LA, they had I for Indian. In New Mexico, they had C for copper. But it wasn't consistent, and it was only like little pockets thought, maybe I'm going to put this in there to identify Native Americans. It really wasn't very useful. In 1860 to 1870, you would be counted if you were a Native American, but only if you renounced your tribe. And so when I started to read a little bit more, I learned that this was there was even a journal entry of what was going on with Oneida in New York. And they were told if you signed up or identified yourself on the census, we would give you money for this, but only if you renounced your tribe. And so it's like, oh, okay, we're going to do this, whatever. We're going to get some money from the government. And so in New York, they're waiting for their money to come in, and no money ever came in. And so they had a representative from the tribe go to the government and say, hey, what gives? How come we didn't get paid? You told us that we would. Oh, well, why are we going to pay you? Because, we're Native Americans. And, oh, wait a minute. You didn't renounce your tribe. Just now you're identifying with it. Do you see how it worked? There was no way they could win. And so that's what was going on in 1860 and 1870. In 1880, you were counted as a Native American, but only if you identified with a white family. And that would mean, like, if you were a laborer, if you were doing something with a white family, then maybe we'll count you there. In 1890, they changed it again and said, we're going to identify all Native Americans regardless. But you know what happened? By 1921, there was a fire, and all those records were burned, and all that was left was the first aggregate, and that means like a draft, a rough idea of this is what we're going to do. And so that really didn't prove to be useful. So now we're still trying to figure out how we're going to count Native Americans in this country. So now we're up to 1900, between 1900 and 1940, around, so let's put in 1920, they offered Indian as an option for race. A friend of mine was telling me, because his family is Apache, and they lived out here, and he said that he remembers from his grandmother's stories that in 1933, it was still okay in California to shoot an Indian, and in 1934, that changed. And so I asked him, hey, do you have anything in writing to show that? Because I was just going through Google and looking whatever I could. I said, there's nothing there. And then he told me this. In the National Indian Justice Center, you can find the documentation of that and many other things. And so I'm going to leave that out for later. And I got the name of the woman who wrote a 60-page booklet on different laws that were horrible for California and the dates. And it's all verified, and it's with legal types that have written that up. Okay, so now we're up to 1940. Between 1930 and 1940, you were an Indian according to the percentage or the degree of Indian blood. Now we're getting into people nowadays like Elizabeth Warren, who was probably 0.000001 maybe percent Native American, right? Remember that was going on? But that's where the roots of that started. In 1940, if you were Native American and you married somebody who was white, and that was only one person who was white in this family that you were living in, you were written in as white. And so it wasn't until after World War II, in 1945, that Native Americans were finally accepted on our census. And so what were they trying to do here is to lessen the numbers of people who identified as Native Americans in this country. Let's go on with more of how are you going to prove your identity. We then had, after World War II, was when photo IDs began, and then Scotland Yard invented fingerprints. And so from that point with Scotland Yard is when our technology ways of identifying people started. So it's kind of like, it hasn't relatively long in history we have been able to identify people in that way. Now, anyone here who's not from this country? Okay. Anyone here who's not, keep your hand up, anyone here who's not from California originally? More hands. Anyone here who's not originally from LA? Okay, we got that. So for people who are not originally from this country, can you tell that they're not from this country? Sometimes you can. And how do you do that? It's by just hearing them speak. It's the language. If Evelyn was here, I'd have her speak. Can anybody guess that Evelyn is not originally from LA? Because she has a French accent, right? If Maria Elena was here, I would have picked on her. She is from Argentina, so she has that accent. So our language tells a lot about ourselves. It tells us where we're from. It tells us also our social status based on what you're talking about. Okay, so let me see. Pre-European immigration to California, it's estimated that California, and it all varies when I'm looking online. It's like, so what stats am I going to use? And so I just picked this one. It said that California had 500 tribal groups speaking about 300 dialects of at least 100 languages. California was, even back then, more diverse than any other place in this country because of this variety of languages and dialects. So I'm also a member of California Native Plant Society, and we've had this discussion of, should we go back to naming our native plants by the native languages? And so I've brought that up. So what language are we going to go with? If we're going to name them what it initially was called, is there a different name? Like poppy is found throughout the state. And one of the reasons the California poppy became our state flower was 12 months of the year, a poppy is blooming somewhere in the state. So, that's kind of a cool thing to know, but also it tells you there's also different languages and dialects up and down the state too for the same flower, so you can't do that. So if anyone comes up with a way that you could get back to the original name, that'd be great. Otherwise, you're going to have volumes, for 20 plants. Yes?
Hence the Latin?
Yes, hence the Latin. That's right, because the common names vary too. And so the Latin, is something that worldwide people accept. If you can give the Latin for a plant, it tells a lot about the identification of it, but not everything. Okay, someone who is clearly from LA, raise your hand. Okay. I want you to read to me the first 3 words that I have here.
Santa Ana and Monterey.
And, okay, now, did you hear the letter T? Californians have learned, we're creating our own language. Everyone who is from here, take a chance at it and read it and tell me, as we're going through this, what happened to the T? Is it Santa, like S-A-N-N-A? Pardon?
It disappears.
It disappears. It's not Monterey. We've forgotten about the T. I want it. I-W-A-N. We forgot the T, right? And so we can go through it. Anyone else want to read the rest of these for me, please?
I can't even.
Okay. Wait. What's that? Are you from here? Because it seems those people who actually have not come from this, from out of the country, actually articulate the T's.
I've had people comment to me about how Santa Clarita, you're not saying Santa Clarita.
Yes.
You're saying Santa Clarita.
Yes, exactly.
That's one of my pet peeves I hear all the time.
Santa Clarita.
Santa Clarita. In fact, my wife even wrote to the Signal and said, why don't we just change the name to Clarita? C-A-R-I.
No, I don't do that. I just put the T in there.
Okay. What country are your point of origin?
Who, me?
Yes.
Mexico.
Okay. So how would you read this?
The internet's down.
She said her T's. Unlike the rest of us who are local, she pronounced her T's. Someone else who is a local, read this one for me, please.
I have a job interview next week.
And okay,
Did
so,
I miss it?
yep, you did. Yeah, you did.
Maybe I'm from Santa Clarita.
Okay. Yes.
And it's interesting to hear that a lot of speaking companies say that California has the best accent for public speaking.
I think,
There's no clarity compared to others, it seems, to me.
It's a mix.
Yeah, maybe because it's a mix of.
okay, I'm not from California, I'm not from LA. I'm from,
Oh, okay.
okay, and so I was saying I don't have an accent, but when I talk to my siblings who live in New York and New Jersey, from where I'm from, they said, you absolutely have acquired an accent. How is that so? Well, it's softer. We talk more harsh. And you don't hear that on TV. They seem to, the movie industry wants to have this softer California feel where you're eliminating the T's. Okay, so, pardon? Go ahead.
Just put the 405 up there, it'd be a clear indication.
TV producers and,
Yeah.
and movie, it's like Dan Rather. Remember Dan Rather, the news guy? He was, and it was like Central Indiana or something like that. That was considered the standard pronunciation for English that movie producers and TV producers and stuff would like.
And then when all, those of us not from here go home, don't we start talking of, pick up the language, the lingo? Because I'm from Missouri, so I start saying y'all and all this stuff, because it's friendly.
You know what else we've wound up doing? If we're going to be talking about a freeway, we talk about the 5, the 405, the 101. Are you aware that in other parts of this country, they simply say 118, 23? It doesn't have the in front of it. Where did we come up with this? Yes. Oh, you don't do it. So that's just unique to.
I think the local news people, they do it.
Yeah, or
Traffic
they
reporters.
used to be called names like the Santa Monica.
Yeah, I should. Santa Monica Freeway.
So you know what else we do here that's uniquely Californian? We measure distance with time. Nobody else does that in the country. But pardon? Well, yeah, we say I live 20 minutes away. Or my kid lives 6 hours away. I'm sure that tells you a lot, doesn't it? Because you want to know how long you're going to be inside your car to get there. So what I'm saying is language also evolves. And this is what we're seeing with our identity, too. No wonder California has so many different dialects. I would think over the thousands of years that people have lived here, people are people, and they started saying things that make sense, to the area that they live in, to their friends.
Now you can define distance by, it's $25 to Santa Barbara. Somebody asked you how far.
So that's good. Okay, so one other thing I know with Native American language is there's no word for private ownership. And that was, you're saying no?
No, you're right. There's no mine or.
Right. And so I think that, there was a language barrier plus a lot of other things that was going on that got the situation where it is. There's one thing that is kind of uniform, though, with Native American language, and that's there's Indian Sign Language. Do you know that?
Only for movies.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I know sign language, but not Indian Sign Language. And actually, our sign language came from Indian Sign Language. And then there are different versions of it. There's ASL, there's the Rochester method, there's a variety of them. But it actually originated with Indian Sign Language. And that was more universal, too. That's why tribes could talk to each other, even with the different languages. And I don't think, though, there's a sign language for flowers and the nuances. I mean, there would be flowers in general or specific ones, but I don't think with all the different little varieties that we could still use that. But I need to have that verified. I'm just guessing at that one now. Okay, so we also have language wars. I put up 2 words there, Ilex vomitoria and Myribium vulgara. Does that sound like a plant that you really want to eat? It sounds horrible, doesn't it? So let me tell you what Ilex vomitoria is. When people first came to this country in the 1700s from Europe, they learned that there was a caffeinated beverage that actually grows in a good amount of the United States. And it was like, oh, cool. And so it had the amount of caffeine of between around green tea worth. And it was called Yaupon. I'm probably not saying it right, but it's Yaupon. And so it was made of a plant that was like a holly, and you would take the leaves and you would roast it. You never have it raw. You had it roasted first, and it could be mixed with other types of plants, but it was supposed to be a delicious, refreshing, caffeinated beverage. And it was the English that came by and gave it that lovely Latin name to discourage people from having this. And so here it is. It's being reactivated again. You can buy this in the stores, or if you have anyone who, say, lives in, especially the southeast, but it goes up a little bit, you can find this plant, and like I said, you roast the leaves, and it makes a delightful tea. But, oh my gosh, look at the campaign to try to get people to not drink this when it used to be widespread. And it was just it all rested inside a name. They didn't just do that with native plants, though. The Marubium vulgar, that was brought over here by Europeans, and somebody gave that terrible name, and it worked. This was a medicinal plant that was used for people who had respiratory problems. It was a tea that you could use for sore throat or breathing problems. And we look at it now as a non-native plant. It's certainly not invasive, and it's called horehound. Anyone ever hear of horehound? In the 1800s, they made it into a candy. You can buy it, and it's mostly sugar, corn syrup, garbage, and I know how to make it because I'm just special that way. So I have horehound candy that I made, and you're welcome to try it, and I'm passing this around. And anyhow, it has a kind of a weird taste. The only ingredients in it is horehound. I was with some other hikers. We were at the top of Los Pinedos Trail. We picked some. To make it, you have just the leaves, you have no stem, no other part of the plant. You clean it really good. It was 2 cups of very tightly packed horehound, and then I had water added to it. I simmered it for about a half hour, removed all the vegetation, added brown sugar and molasses to it, and that's what you're eating. And so that's horehound candy. You can now be one of the first kids on your block to say that you know what it tastes like. If you don't like it, that's why it's wrapped in paper. You can spit it out. There's a trash can somewhere around here, I'm sure. But anyhow, so you get to see what that's like. Let's see. Oh, okay, we did. Okay. Okay, I'm going back to there. Okay, what I wanted to talk about also is the past. Schools teach kids that Native Americans liked to eat acorns, that it was a principal food. And so I made this for our open house last May because I got tired of hearing it. And so here it is, and it was, who eats the acorns? Okay. So I have a picture of all the woodland creatures, and you have the woodland animals. We have the animals and the birds and the insects and the deers. There are so many people that eat the acorns. Okay, so we see that. We know that animals eat acorns. Who else eats acorns? And they're going to say Native Americans ate acorns because this is what they get if they went through 4th grade California history. Is that all who ate the acorns? No. When the pioneers were coming out west, did they eat acorns? We know that they brought supplies on their wagons and things, but here you have the pioneers, and if they saw an oak tree, they ate the acorns. What about in the world? In Europe? In different parts of Europe, in France, in Germany, did they eat acorns? Yes, they did. What about in China, in Korea, in Russia? Do they eat acorns? They do as well. And so, any place in this world that oak trees grow and produce acorns, people ate them. You have to leach them. There's an amount of time that's involved to make it edible. We have a couple of oak trees, like the white oak, the black oak, I think, that you don't need to leach very much. The amount of tannins in it varies with the trees, but wherever there are acorns, even with our little scrub oaks, you can use those too. It's all acorns, and they have a high proton. Well, we'll get to that. Why they're so good. Originally, around 12,000 years ago, people started farming and they grew wheat and other grains. But acorns supplemented the diet until the past century. So an acorn is a nut. A peanut is a legume. It's not a nut. A walnut, a pecan, that's not a nut either. That's a drupe. But acorns are a true nut, and chestnuts are a true nut, and it has lots of protein in it. So that supplements the diet. And here we have a breakdown, and it depends. It's this breakdown I have is 12% protein, 14% carbs, and 37% fat. That is dependent, though, on where the tree is growing, what type of acorn it is, and the time of year that you're harvesting. Some oak trees have two crops, and so that varies too. So this is loosely taken when you have the breakdown to it. However, I do know you could go an entire winter eating acorns and not die. You cannot go an entire winter and eat rabbit, for example. You have no fat on a rabbit, and you will die if that's all you have as your principal diet. This is one of the few foods, if not the only food, that you can eat throughout a winter and survive solely on that. Okay, so what are the problems with acorns? We get weevils inside the acorns, and you see the little holes in it. This is what a weevil looks like, all blown up. It's kind of gross, but it lives there, and it's nasty. It hatches out of the shell, kind of like an alien, but there it is. That's what it looks like, all blown up.
But wouldn't that provide extra protein?
Pardon? It could. Some people could look at that, but also while the weevil is inside the acorn, it's also eating the acorn. And so do you want to eat the weevil, or do you want to eat the acorn meat that's more balanced? So yeah, you do have that. And then also I know that when I've gone up to, like in the Libres, our coast live oak has a lot of tannins, and it takes a while for the tannins to get leached out. But in the Libres, where you have black oak, there's not very many tannins in that. But the acorns were filled with weevils. And so it could be that the tannins are also kind of suppressing the weevils as well. That's my guess from using it. How do you identify the different type of oak trees? They're identified by the leaves and also the acorn caps. And from that, that's pretty much your identification. If you want an oak identified, make sure you have both of those parts, not just a general picture of the tree shape. You need to have the caps, you need the leaves. You're looking at something. Okay. And so were there wars and battles going on in California among tribes? There were skirmishes, but there really wasn't big battles that went on. And what were the skirmishes mostly about? Oaks, the acorns. When people would collect the acorns, again, depending on the source, I saw more things written on about 400 pounds per person was collected. And that wasn't just for the year. It was in case the oak trees, because everyone had their designated oak trees from where you would be collecting. And perhaps your tree had a bad year. It happens. The oak trees do not always produce lots of acorns in the course of a year. Sometimes they just need a break. And so sometimes people might, argue over oak trees. And so that was where some skirmishes were happening. And, okay, so here we have, just like people are all different, our wild food is as well. So that makes it pretty difficult to get the nutritional numbers of how good something is. Again, it's the location, it's the type of plant it is, and that's it for my little thing on acorns for the public. We also know Native Americans were good with cordage. Jill had one that was good. I should have had that up. That showed different plants that you can make cordage from. This is something that I made a few years ago. I like to make cordage because I like to I need to keep my hands occupied. And this was from a phone conversation that lasted about 2 hours. And so, you may tell me that you live 5 hours away. Well, I can tell you my phone conversation was this long. And how this has worked, I don't know when we would have a time to show. I could teach you how you do cordage with yucca. You have the yucca leaf. You cut off the tip so you don't hurt yourself. You shred it until it's like grass. It's very, very fine. And then from there, you fold it over, and all you're doing is 2 motions. You're twisting it on one side and flipping it over to the other. And then once you have your cord, you can combine this cord and that cord and make it stronger until you can almost get a rope. And so I was with a group and we were trying to compare cordage plants to see what would work the best. And by the way, with native plants, once it goes through one shrinking, it doesn't change in size anymore. It's not going to, with being pulled and stretched, it's not going to get weaker. It's not going to get smaller, and when it's wet, it's going to stay the same. Our man-made fibers that you buy at the hardware store can't say that. You have to tighten things up after a while because they start losing their strength.
Helen, if we have time, I think I have that movie on that computer where in South America.
Next week. Next week I'll do that. Okay, so anyhow, and why is cordage so important? Well, if you didn't have, again, think 150 years ago, we didn't have duct tape. So, right? So let's say you're walking along and the sole of your shoe comes off, like it's happened before with some of my hiking friends. I use duct tape, for at least to get through the hike, but the cordage could tie it up together. There was no nails. So you're going to tie your structure together. So you better be pretty good with knots, and your cordage better be pretty reliable too, right? For first aid, fire, hanging food, a clothesline, your shoelace breaks, as a trap wire to, not just for a snare, but let's say you're camping and you want to be sure that nobody else is in your area. And so you might set up like a couple of cans or something around so you could. So there are a lot of uses for cordage, and if you camp or backpack, you should still carry it with you. And what's the second thing that follows cordage? It's basketry. So this, Ron and I were talking about, there's a museum committee with Sue Sutton. This may go into the museum in the next room. This I saw last year up at Monterey Museum. It was upstairs, and it was to show kids how to weave a basket. We have 2 main types in California. It's the you have twining, you have coiled. So you have the 2 ones that are pretty common. I have rope here so they can learn about weaving these things in and out. When I did open house, there are kids that had no idea how to even move things in and out, things that we would think are no-brainers that, you should be able to know how to do. You'd be surprised, and parents were then showing their kids, so this is how you do that. So let's say the kid has fun and, it spins, right? and so they're learning, or a school group comes and you encourage them to go in and out. What they also did up in Monterey, and I'll leave some of these here, they made little tiny construction paper forms, and you have yarn, and so you can practice weaving it in and out and take it home. And so you can see this is your beginnings of making a basket. And so I'll leave this here with that. But okay, so that's your basketry. Baskets have existed before pottery. We have hunter-gatherers. Are you going to want to carry a heavy pot with you that might break? Or are you going to carry a basket? And so that's why you have baskets. But archaeologically wise, it's hard to find these things because it's fiber. things rot, that gets old and there's not very much left of it. But we know that basketry was around before the pottery. Let's see. Oh, okay. So now what do I do with the little clicker thing? Oh, here it is. Okay. So I wanted to talk about some of the contributions that we've learned from natives. One is oysters. Do you know at one point California had so many oysters that it went through the entire Pacific coast? Imagine not just Northern California, but all the way to San Diego, into Mexico, you had oysters. And so let me tell you about these oysters. Some of them were as tall as 10 inches. They were sweet and flavorful. That's not how they're like on the East Coast, by the way. And what if I were to tell you that this food gives you energy, helps you think, opens your mind and body to make you feel like you're unstoppable? Do you want a sample of this wonderful food? Yeah. Oh, yes, we do. So let's go with it. And here we have the native California oysters. Oh, no. There is nothing here. And why is that? Because it is extinct. And so this is what extinct looks like. We can't sample it. You can't see for yourself what these wonderful oysters taste like. Yes?
So out in Ventura at the state park, they have the Jolly Oyster.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, and from the Jolly Oyster, you have, this is one of the oyster shells. We can pass this around. Okay, and you know what type of...
Okay, that's where I was getting. Did that recover the extinct species, or is that a whole different one?
That's a whole different one. That one is a Pacific oyster, and it comes from Japan. Interestingly, Japan did not get rid of their oysters, but it was because ours were sellable, and they made their way around the world. And there's a thing about our oysters. So, okay, so I told you that what we've got is the Pacific oysters. They found out that with sustainably harvesting these oysters, because what did the Native Americans do? That these were on our coast for thousands of years and they didn't disappear. Americans come here for the gold rush, and within 50 years we decimated it, right? And so what went wrong? Well, natives gathered what went up on the shore, or what came close. It was like along the coastline. That's what they harvested. But did you know that there was a lot more oysters when they started in embryo? They were deep in the ocean. They were quite a distance away. And as they got older, they would move in closer. The tide would bring them in. And so that was one of the things that they're doing, and they're looking at it now. And so we have the oysters. We still have oysters in California, but they're from Japan. And so they found some of these little, so I kind of lied a little bit for the drama. We do have the California oysters, but not edible, not sellable. You're never going to know about them. And so scientists are working to try to create these underground water things for the oysters so they can bring them back. So that's one of the projects that's actually being done right now. Even as I speak, they're trying to bring back this wonderful food. Okay, so we know about the oysters and the estuaries that love, that oysters and them get together. And it's not called agriculture, it's called aquaculture. So if you want to look more about the California oysters and how much they contribute, they filter the water, they did marvelous things for our ecosystem and our environment. Look up aquaculture. Okay, then we have, I keep doing this. Our native bees. We have 2,000, probably over that, native California bees. And so, when they talk about bees, they talk about the European honeybees. Well, European honeybees and the Africanized bees, you have to be careful because they can sting. Well, you know what? Our California native bees are not that hive mentality. And up until, again, that wonderful year, they like to use 1850, all our native plants flourished and thrived without the European honeybee. We had plenty of pollinators. Our pollinators are not just bees, they're beetles, they're ants, they're birds, there's all wind. There's lots of things that pollinated. But California got along quite nicely without the European honeybees. The European honeybees brought in the cash crops like almonds and name some of the things the stone fruit. Peaches, things like that bring in money, but it's not environmentally working with us because those cash crops also take a lot of water. But anyhow, that is a native bee, and I was looking all over for my picture of a native bee, and I finally found it. This is one of them that I found up in Simi Valley, and I blew it up, and you can pass it around if you want. It was blue. It was the size of a large carpenter bee. Had this metallic body, and they even have furry blue bees also, and I've never been lucky enough to take a picture of it. But Google California native bees, and you're going to see every color in the rainbow when it comes to them, and some of them are quite small, too. It's not as big as you think your traditional bees are. Pardon?
Denny said they were dinky.
Oh, dinky. Well, yes. I said some of them are really tiny. And if you want to call it dinky, okay. All right. And then we have the red-legged frog. Now, have you ever eaten frog?
Yes.
What's it like?
Tastes like chicken.
Okay, there you have it from somebody who's actually done that. So,
I heard it tastes better than chicken. Sweeter than chicken.
have you had it too? And so you have what did it taste like?
It tastes delicious.
Delicious. Okay.
It melts in your mouth. It's just like a stimulus.
Okay, so the red-legged frog was prolific in California, up and down the coast. It was, again, hunted not to extinction, but now it's on the endangered list. Okay, and so that's what it looks like. That is served in restaurants because it's big enough that they can make meals out of it. And so there are parts, like in our area, it is listed as endangered. So you're saying that the red-legged frog is delicious. Right, and so here we have, okay, so we have our frog, and it's about this size. And it's not empty because it's not extinct, right? And so this still gets sold, and some of it is being agriculture, what do you call it? Farms, yeah, our agriculture farms for these frogs. The other reason why some of these frogs disappeared was high school science. Did anyone ever have to dissect a frog? Yeah. Well, it came from this, and there was another one. There's a spotted green frog that they used. And so the combination of those two things is what put it on the watch list. Yes?
So is it still eaten now, even if it's endangered, or is that not allowed?
It depends on where you're living. Like,
Here in California?
in California, yeah. I was up in north of Sacramento, where my daughter lives.
So yeah, they're selling it or they're not?
They are selling it. They are selling it, but it depends on the area you live, because she's like where there's all these waterways. And so there was like 3 packages of frog that you could buy. And so I think that's the farmed ones. I don't think it's the wild ones. And I have never seen it here. Have you? Has anyone ever seen frogs?
Red-leg frog?
Where?
Yeah. Well, any kind
Where,
of.
like here?
Pardon? Here.
In restaurants?
Oh, you get it?
You can get in restaurants.
Ask them what type of frog they're using.
Well, Olivia said they use the bullfrogs a lot.
Okay, so bullfrogs are really big.
Non-native.
And there's a problem with the bullfrogs. Okay, so there's a problem with the bullfrogs because the bullfrogs will eat these.
Yeah.
And so that's not a good one to have. And so if they're going to eat them, bon appetit. Go ahead, yes.
Is that the guy that Samuel Clemens wrote about in California?
As a matter of fact, I'm glad you asked that question. Yes, it is. And they are protected up there. Yes, they are. Okay. The California quail. I mentioned that wherever you go in the state, you will see a poppy every month of the year. Well, with California quail, which is our state bird, right? They can be found in chaparral, sagebrush, oak woodlands, and foothill forests. But you know what? We have a second quail called the mountain quail. So that takes in, I think, all of our environments. So we have quail all over California. It takes quail from the time they are hatched to the time they are laying, 24 weeks. There's another quail known in this world called a coturnix, and it takes 7 weeks from the time that it's hatched to the time that it's laying. So you have people who want to farm and are very interested in this bird, but they don't want to mix it with the California quail. They're not sure what's, and so we have laws against it. If anyone imports one of those, they have to get all kinds of permits. They have to have people come out and inspect what they've got. But I'm just saying, be aware that there's this third quail that comes from Africa, I think. And it's faster. But our quail, the reason why, even with our population, why the quail is still common is because they're adaptable, to all the influx of population we've got. By my daughter's house, they live in the blackberry bushes along by the ditch alongside the road, So that's not their native habitat, but they learned a way to make it work for them. So that becomes common. That's not endangered. Can you eat quail?
Yes.
How many quail do you need? A lot. And so that's another reason. Not too many people are catching quail, I don't think, and eating them. And so that's why they don't have a problem with it. What was one of the main foods that people ate prior to the 1900s? Did they all shoot deer and fish? What's that? Duck. That could be. But the thing that was the most common was rodents, rabbits, squirrels. And we think now, I wouldn't eat that, but everybody did. And again, when you read California history, they attribute it just to Native Americans. It's like, no. In Europe, they did this. Where they're, all around the world, this was their main diet. It was easy to catch, and this is what people had. Okay, so I have one more thing to go on to. So whose land are you on anyhow? We've moved around, for people who have had different addresses. I'm going to leave this one up. If you text this number and enter a zip code from any place you've lived in this country, they will tell you what tribes live there. So I'll leave that up for a little bit later. And I need somebody to read this. Who can read with dramatic? Who wants to be theatrical reading? Okay, Ron. Okay. So I wanted to take this back to Placerita. So we hear the story of Placerita that some dude was, going along, took a nap, saw some onions, you pulled them up, and hence gold was discovered, right, in a nutshell?
Yeah.
So I got this from the Historical Museum.
You want me to read this?
Yes, I want you to
Oh,
read
in
out
dramatic
with drama.
March 1842,
Wait. And when was California state?
1850.
1850, so, okay.
Francisco Lopez was herding cattle at Live Oak Canyon from the Del Valle Ranch, Castaic. While taking a lunch break, this geologist dug up some onions growing under an oak, and at the end of the day brought them back to the ranch kitchen. It was there in the rinse water that gold flecks were found. Word got out, hundreds of prospectors in Los Angeles and Mexico arrived. Placer means an area along a creek containing valuable minerals. Live Oak Canyon became Placerita Canyon, the first discovery of gold in California.
Okay, so this is a slightly different story than what you've heard.
The flecks in the water.
Right. And so I like that because the ranch that he took it back to was in Castaic. I live in Castaic. I want to be able to say that California was first discovered in Castaic.
Where'd you get that?
Pardon?
Where'd you get that?
From Leon.
Supposedly, he was Camulos. The Del Valle family lived down, towards Piru.
Ah.
But I'm not gonna. That's interesting.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, so here's another version of it. Does it make sense, though? Okay, first of all, when they're talking about onions, no, this is what an onion looks like that's native. This is not what you think of when you're thinking of either this or something that's beige or brown or red, right? You are not thinking this, but this is our typical localized onion. It's in bloom. If you grow onions, from this, they're going to be white. The head's going to kind of look like that. But anyhow, getting back to the story that Ron read, does it make sense then that some guy is, going for a nap, he picks up the onions, is he going to say, oh, look, there's gold on that, because there's going to be dirt on it and stuff? Or does it make more sense that he went back, to the ranch and said, hey, I got some onions to add to food, and there it is coming off in the, in the rinse water? And so it could be that he didn't really discover it. It was whoever was, cleaning the produce that noticed that. And so my point there is when we're trying to understand history, use logic and common sense. Put yourself into that place. I started to have a love of Native American history by doing it. I lived in an area in back east that used to make bricks, and they were just starting to have people move in. It was like there wasn't very many people who lived in the town that I was in. And we had a library and a brilliant librarian. And if, as kids, as we're roaming around, if we found something interesting, you take it to the library and you would say, hey, do you think this is really cool? And she might find a book. And if you read the book, then that book that you read, along with that thing that you found, would go into one of the glass cases that was in that little room before you entered the library. So that's how, you would find like a squirrel skull or, this. And so you see all these strange things that, the librarian was genius. And so I started to find some little Native American things that were out there, like little fragments of pottery. This was out there. And then one day I saw a little pipe. It was about this big, it was white, and it was, broken off, and it's like, oh, tell me more. And so I was hooked on it. And so I would hear stories, well, they did this, and then I would trot on home and say, Mom, we got to do this, and so that was a very young thing. And so that's what I'm just saying. When you read about something, maybe try not to just accept what you read. Try it. See if it works like that. I know that when it comes to Native American foods, there's not too many just Native American restaurants. There's one that opened up about a year or so ago in Oakland. I haven't been there to it. You have to give reservations so they know that you're coming. But it's just strictly Native American food based on what we have here in this state. And so, that's kind of an interesting thing to do. Pardon?
I gotta ask.
Go ahead.
Are there big roots on that native onion plant?
On the onions? I have never really dug.
Try it.
I haven't done, no, but I can tell you, you can tell the difference between an onion and say something that may resemble it, because all onions smell like onion. And that I have done. I have smelled the onion, and what I'll do with plants is I'll run my hand along it and then smell my hand, or I might even take my fingernail and scrape it to smell something underneath it. You're not going to die that way. You know, you may be in pain if it's something that you have skin irritation like poison oak. I don't suggest that, so, you know, get to know the poisons. But just smelling, you're not going to run into those problems. And onions, no matter what type it is, they all smell like onion. So, yeah, sure. Also, what's going on tribal-wise, you know, the issues of fires in the state have, you know, made the news. You know, right now we're in cold and wet, and we're going to have all this, you know, weather this week, so people aren't thinking about that. But sure, as you know, it's going to get warm again. We're going to have fire issues. So with Fish and Wildlife, we now have a thing called Tribal Liaison at wildlife.california.gov, where you have people in Northern California who are working with Fish and Wildlife and the fire departments at finding ways to do controlled burns and other things that were done to try to not have the fires that, you know, they're saying, oh, we're all going to be on fire at some point in time. It doesn't have to be that way. Native Americans are environmentalists. They educate us on hatcheries, fish ladders, how to use both the left and right side of the brain. That's when you're making baskets, and you see them with the patterns in it. Has anyone ever tried to make a basket? How hard is it? What did it look like?
It looked like a basket.
Pardon?
I mean, the basket.
It was okay.
Yeah.
Could you do a pattern in it?
No, I just made it exactly how it was made. It was made with the palm leaf.
Oh, palms. Okay.
Palms,
Yeah. What about you?
Reeds, but I was like 10, 12 when I made it. So it looked like a basket. It was
Yeah.
really, and I
medium size. Sorry.
Yeah. Shannon?
I'm Sandra.
Yeah. Didn't you say that you did?
Yes. I made a basket. The first one looked really bad that I ever did. The second one I did, and I had a Yaqui, half Yaqui person helping me. And I got the sides up, and that person showed me how to put a little bit of a pattern in, but I think she did most of the pattern. I didn't, and if I didn't have her there, there was no way I would have had pattern.
So I did try to make a pattern, but it looked ugly and loose, so I just undid that section and redid it again, and it came out.
Did anyone else do a basket? I don't know if I didn't want to miss any hands. Okay, so it's not easy though, right? I mean, it's bad enough. It's difficult enough to just make the basket, but to try to think out, how am I going to do a pattern in here too? That is not an easy thing. And so they say that's working both your left and right brain. And so, you know.
I think it's just like anything, practice just helps you make it better. And
It's amazing how they dyed certain things to put a pattern in the walls, you know, to make. How do they put those snakes in there, and how do they do that? You know, because they
Yeah.
put the different fibers and stuff to do it. That's, I mean, it's like putting, you know, putting a pattern in a rug or something. It's like, how did they do that? That's just amazing to me, how they put a snake or some type of bird in the pattern. Just unbelievable.
Right.
color change.
But I mean,
That's just a little symbol or something, you know.
I think if more people would learn that, it would do more benefit than Sudoku, you know, the little word puzzles and Wordle, because you're working both parts of the brain. And, you know, as for the wildfire strategy and controlled burns, I think that that's just, you know, fantastic. But it's starting in Northern California. It seems like things slowly filter to Southern California, but we're there. The ways, the indigenous ways, are an asset to America. We all bring something to the table, but this is like a treasure that's been hidden, and it's nice to learn more.
It's
Okay.
like I said earlier, you know, it's like our people have been here forever, but now your people are here. The other people are living here, and so they have interest in doing things like that, and they can preserve things and learn how to do things without, you know, abusing it, you know, in moderation, then the world's gonna be a better place. You know, just simple
Right.
as that.
Okay, that's all I've got.
That's it, huh?
That's it. You're welcome.
You want to answer, anybody got any questions for Helen, well, since she's up here?
I think that's it.
I have a question.
Okay,
Going back to the acorn,
yes.
why they're so nutritious and good to eat, and why we don't continue eating them?
Oh, why we do. We have people who clean our acorns, or who are harvesting our acorns, even along. Enrique told me this along Valencia Boulevard, and they'll have trash bags filled with acorns. Like in the housing there, going into the hills, and that gets shipped to Korea, where they get shelled and cleaned and made into acorn flour. If you want to try acorns, I could teach you that. Or if you want to just see first if you like it, go to one of the Asian food marks.
Yeah.
And so they call it acorn starch. But anything, if it may go under acorn starch, it might be under acorn powder. They don't necessarily use the word flour, but it's still acorn flour. It still works the same way.
There's an Asian market on Soledad Canyon. It's a Filipino Asian market, but they sell it in bags, yeah. It's kind of like squishy, but it's like...
Right. And if you want to taste it, you can take 4 tablespoons of acorn flour with 1 cup of water. You stir it really good, and then you put it in your microwave, because we have microwaves, right? And you put it in there for a minute or so and watch it. It will turn this chocolate brown. And when it turns that color, you'll see, from what you had. I put it inside a small Pyrex pan, and within about 20 minutes, it becomes a gelatinous thing. And so we cut it into squares. I could bring some next week.
It's an acquired taste.
It has, well, I've been, but...
They used to make a mush out of it too, and they called it we wish, and the people joked and said, they called it we wish because we wish we didn't have to eat it.
I think the point is, like Helen's made it, it's what you add to it.
Exactly. You're
It's sort of
absolutely
like,
right.
by itself, you're right, it's not much.
You can add flavors to it.
It doesn't really have much of a flavor, so when I brought it in here, I've added like lemon curd to it. You can actually make a passable lemon meringue pie using acorn, and then you add the lemon to it and then do your pie. It doesn't look lemony though, and so...
Those gelatinous things that they made too, they made them round and they made them like little tortillas.
Yes.
Made with stuffed meat and vegetables and everything, kind of like a taco or burrito.
And it's kind of fun. I've done, for some events, I've made chocolate chip cookies, but I don't, you want me to bring those next week? I'll do that. But yes, let me tell you how you do it. It is so much fun.
If you add chocolate in anything, it's good, okay?
Yeah, acorn brittle. I've done with all kinds of stuff. But if you do your recipe for chocolate chip cookies, I do not use any sugar except for the chocolate chips. So I have persimmons. I can persimmons. My freezer is filled with canned persimmons now. And so I use one of my 1.5 cup jars of persimmons instead of sugar. So it's sugar-free without being the artificial sugar. And then I take some of my regular flour, and now I'm adding acorn flour to it too. And so that's all mixed up, and then I throw in my chocolate chips, of course, and then I put it in the refrigerator overnight. And then in the morning before coming down, I put it, as cookies, and it's soft. It's this marvelously soft chocolate chip cookies from the acorn flour, and the acorn flour gives it that consistency. You're gonna, or, okay, yes.
Helen, is there anything in this park you do not eat?
Yeah, you know what, wait, that is, well, hold on.
Don't eat the cucumber.
Okay, that's a really good question, because you need to know what the poisons are. You need to know also, some people have allergies. Just like, I could show you peanuts, and maybe there's somebody here that's severely allergic to peanuts. So, some people have allergies to it, and they may not even know that they're allergic to a certain food. But then also, it's a really important thing to know what your poisons are too. Right? I mean, with mushrooms, I've eaten wild mushrooms, but only if I have 2 mycologists with me who have been practicing for 30 years, and they agree. Okay, and that's the only reason why I'll do mushrooms, because that's too difficult, to mess up with.
I mentioned the stinging nettles too, that's interesting.
Oh, the stinging nettles. I like stinging nettles. So what do you want me to tell you about that?
You mentioned foods you shouldn't eat, foods that on the surface, you're not gonna just pick it up and eat.
Right.
But if you know how to prepare it like you do.
Right, okay, so let's say, people think, why do we even have poison oak in Placerita, right? Well, it's because almost all our mammals and our birds and our insects, they all eat poison oak. They would probably not thrive and maybe not even exist in our area if we did not have a poison oak. So poison oak, to me, is for all our critters that live here. However, we also have stinging nettle. We have a short non-native form, and we also have a native nettle. We have two different types. The bigger one is the native one. It has the same properties to it. When I collect it, you can brush on it, and it's like, oh, that hurt, and you might even get a rash from it. Don't ever, if you see stinging nettle, here's your plant. If you do this to it, you're going to get hurt. If you go underneath it and pick it, you're not going to have any problem, because that's the way what's the poison that ants have? Formic acid. The formic acid is what you're being allergic to. And so when you're going like that, it's fine. But I'll take the stinging nettle and pick it, and then I'll put it inside my oven on the lowest heat until it kind of gets crunchy. When it gets, all you have to do is apply heat to stinging nettle, and that removes that problem. And so the stems of the stinging nettle are too fibrous, and so you have either very, very thin stems or just the leaves. And so I'll throw that inside my skillet, and as soon as it wilts a little bit, it's fine. It tastes better than spinach. It's really good. I've made stinging nettle soup before, for here. It could do that too. But, and some people, if they have arthritis, especially if it's in their hands, and, I will volunteer and say, hey, I'll help pick, and, because it helps the arthritis. For me, the effect is good for, a couple of days. Shannon says that she's got, a bunch of stinging nettle if anybody wants to collect some, see Shannon after the class. But, Sandra, sorry.
But I have another way, I don't put it in the oven. When I pick it, I put it in very hot water. I blanch it in hot water. And then I pick off the leaves because the seeds can cause a lot of digestive problems.
Oh, well, I'll take it and shake it out in the bag, and then I'll put it inside my flower pots because I want it to grow. And so, I like the seeds, and I will spread the joy because I love stinging nettle. Okay, so look at this. Look at it this way: that poison oak is for the animals, but stinging nettle, because it's so high in everything, I think is for people because we know fire. And it's fire that makes it so we can eat it.
Milk thistle.
Pardon?
Milk thistle. Good for you.
Milk thistle. Okay, so people will, do you know that there's places in Europe where they intentionally grow milk thistle? And it's because it's medicinal for people with liver damage, right? Okay, so is that what you're going to bring up? Or okay, so milk thistle isn't such a bad thing. And also, you can identify milk thistle because you see the little white going through the leaves, right? If you know exactly where the milk thistle is growing and it's still green and the white hasn't happened, you can pick that and eat that in your salad with no problem at all. It's once the white starts coming into the leaves that your body isn't going to digest it. Any other questions?
I've never had any of those things. I don't eat that. I've had cricket tacos. Grasshopper tacos.
Pascal does that. There's a guy named Pascal Baudard, and he's from Belgium. He used to be a sniper, and now he's a gourmet cook, okay? And he has written books on... Pardon?
Not a lot of meat on those grasshoppers.
No, but you know what they've done? They found that with crickets that there's a lot of good protein with it. But people don't want to eat the crickets. So do you know what they do? They take the crickets and they dehydrate them and then they pulverize them. And then now you have a bag of cricket flour. which somehow in our head says cricket flour is really good. And do you know what? You know how expensive protein bars are? Remember how candy bars don't really cost a whole, they're kind of cheap. But then as you get into the breakfast bars and the protein bars and you get into the more gourmet things that cost a lot, look up cricket powder in Latin. I don't know it, but look it up and see if that isn't one of the ingredients that they're using as their protein. Oh, I'm sorry, I just shattered somebody's dreams and hopes, okay? Learn.
We used to have, Paul Levine was one of our instructors. He was an expert on butterflies, and he used to say,
thank you.
You're all eating insects. I hope you know that.
Of course.
Because if you look on the box of whatever you buy, flour or crackers, there's always something, or not always, but sometimes there's a little statement, this product contains less than 0.01% insect parts.
All the granaries have insects.
Right.
Yeah.
You're eating it anyway.
FDA has categorized things by the maximum amount of insects you can have or the minimum amount.
Yeah.
So,
So,
even at restaurants.
yeah. Paul used to have a slide he'd show, and because some restaurants do actually serve the insects with this. He'd always lead off with that, and say, you're eating insects anyway. So.
And the United States is really we're the last holdout for not using insects. In all other countries in the world, they use it.
Well, the natives used to eat the larvae and stuff from different bugs.
Have you been able to, though?
No, I've never done that, but up north, there's a lot of natives that eat the larvae and insects.
Psychologically, I haven't been able to wrap myself around that one yet. But I know what you're talking about. I mean, it's like we have snails, right? And I know that they've served escargot, and I can't do that one either.
Go to France, they'll make it very
But I can tell you something about snails, though. The snail slime, somebody I think that started in Japan, where somebody was, picking a lot of snails, and found that it was good for a burn that she had. And so they
also do it for skincare. It was on the news the other day how many snails climb on these women's faces and stuff.
Yeah. But it started out by accident, and they found that it was very good for burn victims. And so they were using snail slime for burns. And then other people said, well, gee, if it does that for your burn, what about making me beautiful? And so it became one of the most expensive skin creams out there. You're right. Snail slime, but I mean, I don't know if I would bring it to having a crawl along either. Yeah.
My sister was a science teacher, and one of her experiments was which sticks things together better, super glue or banana slug slime? And she would bring in banana slugs, and they would see which one was the better glue. It was the banana slug.
What were they gluing?
Pieces of paper.
How about a cut, Yeah. Because they're using glue in surgeries now, It's minor surgeries.
Well, weren't they using super glue for? Yeah.
Crazy glue, perfect.
Wow.
Okay, so
Okay.
it's the 12 o'clock hour, so everybody can go home. You're dismissed, but